Have you ever come across that meme that says, "What if Bruce Wayne has actually been in Arkham this whole time? Batman is just his delusion." The image started circulating on social media and internet forums years ago, and it explains how several characters from Batman's world came to be. What if Bruce Wayne is actually an Arkham patient? Poison Ivy is the nurse who sedates him when he's out of control. Two-Face. He's the assistant who acts kindly when the doctors are present but secretly beats the patients. The Riddler is the therapist who asks difficult questions. The Mad Hatter is the hypnotherapist who Bruce is convinced is trying to brainwash him. And of course, his arch-nemesis Dr. Joker and his assistant Dr. Harleen Quinzel couldn't be left out. They see Bruce as their most important patient. Both are desperate to bring him back to sanity, while Batman fights with all his strength to protect Gotham City. Of Joker and Harley Quinn, the image went viral. Social media users love these stories like Creepypastas, but I believe there's an even stronger reason. And it's that maybe in the collective imagination we think of Bruce Wayne as someone who isn't completely sane. That's why this theory really resonated with people. In fact, there are several comics that actually suggest this idea that Bruce Wayne might be more similar to the villains he fights than we usually think. A few years ago, an official story was published that appears to incorporate several points from this theory. Today we'll discuss that topic. Welcome to Geo the Geek Monitor, quick culture and geeky mind vitamins. Today we're going to talk about the Batman Creepypasta, which became canonical in the comics. Although the story behind this image was created by an anonymous fan, the image itself is completely real. It belongs to artist Joe Kubert, who drew it for Batman Comic 327's 1980 cover. A story where Bruce Wayne pretends to be a patient at Arkham, aiming to expose a prisoner trafficking network within the institution. At one point, Professor Milo, the doctor in charge, discovers Batman's plan. He drugs him, puts him in a straitjacket, and tries to convince him he is not Batman but a real patient of the Asylum, and that everything is a delusion, a product of his sick mind. In a confused moment, Bruce begins to doubt himself. In the end, after noticing his dilated pupils in a mirror, he realizes he was drugged and defeats Professor Milo. I'm not sure if the fanfiction's author read this comic, or maybe he just searched online for a Batman Asylum image or got inspired somehow. After seeing this image, the point is that the image and the text fit together very well. And I think that's part of the success of this fanfiction, which works like a kind of urban legend. Urban legends are stories that didn't happen but are told as if they were real. That's the point. People tell you these kinds of stories as if they came from a reliable source. Some friend of a cousin, some acquaintance, and that's why people tend to believe these stories more. Often these stories involve supernatural or mysterious elements, but they happen in places that are familiar to us, like a church in the city, an old school, and so on. In other words, what makes these stories work is also that they combine fiction with real elements. We can see something similar at play in this image since it uses a canonical image, with the professional quality of artist Joe Kubert, but taken out of context to present us with a story made by a fan. Urban legends have been around for years and each place has its own. With the internet, these legends became known as creepypastas. Stories copied and pasted across various internet forums often triggered false emotions. They have a strong element of morbid curiosity and give you the feeling of dealing with something dangerous, but without exposing yourself too much because in the end, you know it's just a story. Many creepypastas are based on already well-known characters, like the story of a haunted Majora's Mask cartridge, a story called Ben Drowned, or the story of Sonic X, which involves a haunted disc of a Sonic game. If you notice, creepypastas tend to touch on common themes and somewhat cliché narratives, but they still work. Because supposedly it's not the work of a professional, but of a completely normal person like you and me, who is supposedly telling this story. This Batman image uses these elements to go viral and makes us reflect on it. If Bruce Wayne is a millionaire guy who dresses up as a bat to fight crime, wouldn't it make more sense to think that he's a mentally ill man? This topic is widely discussed in comics and adaptations. Batman has mental issues. One of the first times the topic was addressed seriously was in the comic The Killing Joke from 1912. Here, Alan Moon suggests that Batman and Joker are more alike than we think, because both are the result of a bad day and both are the result of trauma. One that turned Joker into the embodiment of unleashed madness, the one that terrorizes Gotham City with his crimes and unpredictable plans, and Batman into the embodiment of restrained madness, this calculating cold person obsessed with eradicating crime in Gotham City. At first, both characters seem very different, but if we look closely, we notice some similarities. So much so that at the end of this comic, Joker tells Batman a joke about two mentally ill people trying to escape from an asylum. And both of them laugh at the end because they see themselves reflected in these two patients. But it's not the only time this idea has been suggested. A year later, Grant Morrison released Arkham Asylum, where criminals take over the asylum and Batman intervenes. And as the story progresses, the line between the Dark Knight and the mentally ill becomes increasingly blurred. In fact, there's a moment where Joker himself suggests that Batman has come home. But I think my favorite example of a story that tells us how sane Bruce is, it's about the comic Batman. Ego, since here we can clearly see the character's mental conflict. Because we see Bruce having an internal conversation with Batman where they both discuss topics like identity, guilt, and obsession. And in this comic, we're told that Bruce sometimes feels the burden of being Batman is too heavy, so his dark side suggests letting Batman take control of his psyche. Just like Two-Face took over Harvey Dent, which again shows us that Bruce has a lot in common with the villains he fights. Although we admire Batman for his strength, willpower, and discipline, his obsession with crime, inability to let go of the past, and constant denial of pleasure and peace also show deep mental and emotional imbalance. In recent years, Detective Comics even created a character embodying this idea, the Batman who laughs. A Bruce Wayne from another Earth was infected with Joker toxin, making him extremely dangerous in recent stories. Before we continue, I want to let you know I have an event in Mexico City on Saturday, December 13th. At Cinedot Azcapotzalco, 2 Post Meridium, we'll watch the Superman movie together. With an awesome combo, I'll end with a talk discussing the Man of Steel story. And we'll finish with a meet and greet where we can talk, take pictures, and hang out together. It's meant to be an afternoon for Superman fans to gather, geek out, and enjoy the movie again. We'll also be bringing these beautiful t-shirt designs and channel merch with a new print designed by Uncle Indy, one of the essentials. So I hope to see you there for this super event. And now let's get back to the topic. That's another reason this image became so popular online. It's part of the collective imagination. We all know that Batman, well, he's not exactly sane, right? However, what I found incredible was that the essence of this image ended up in an official Detective Comics comic, specifically The Last Night on Earth by Scott Snyder and Greg Capullo. A story set outside the main comic continuity, which serves as an ending for the acclaimed Batman run. From the creative team behind The Court of Owls, 0 Year and Death of the Family. I'll share some of the story, then continue the analysis. Bruce Wayne wakes up restrained in a psychiatric asylum, watched by a doctor resembling Joker. He feels numb and can't speak. But the doctor, named Redmond Hoth, tells Bruce that he's been locked up there for almost 20 years after he himself took his parents' lives. At first, Bruce doesn't believe it, but then someone surprising appears. Alfred, his loyal butler, comes to see him and confirms the whole story. Batman was just a grieving child's delusion, with his suit actually being a straitjacket and helmet for shock therapy. His Batcave was that space in his padded cell where he kept a coin and a toy dinosaur. And all his villains were actually doctors and therapists he interacted with in the asylum? Redmond Hoth, Red Hood or Joker, was his doctor. He was the librarian who taught him several languages, and he learned to fight in the hospital gym. Thanks to Dr. Algol, whom Bruce tried to drown in a hot tub thinking it was some kind of magic pit, Bruce is close to believing everything now that everything seems answered. But then he realized something was off, so he grabbed his hood and prepared to escape the asylum, not without first asking Alfred why he had lied to him. This is the premise of the comic, and if you notice, it starts in a way very similar to that image from Even Though He Leaves Later. On the other hand, after escaping from the asylum, Batman finds Joker's head in a lamp. He faces a post-apocalyptic world with him, a future without Superman. Humanity stopped believing in heroes and the values they represent, and the heroes and villains we know are fighting to survive. Gotham City is ruled by a mysterious figure named Omega, who defeated Darkseid. He has Batman's fighting techniques and is about to take control of the free will of the rest of the world. Using the Y equation, there are some very interesting points worth analyzing first, without spoilers in case you want to read the comic, and I'll let you know when the spoilers start. The first point I want to talk about is how this comic turns a very interesting trope on its head. Many comics feature old superheroes returning from retirement for one final adventure. They're often called old man stories, after Old Man Logan. Batman began this trend with his 1986 story The Dark Knight Returns. A comic where Bruce Wayne comes out of retirement to face threats like Joker, Two-Face, and even goes up against Superman himself. The comic was successful, and other stories adapted this popular narrative. Some stories include The Last Ronin, where the last Ninja Turtle seeks to avenge his brother's deaths. Another story about a Peter Parker who retires from being Spider-Man after poisoning Mary Jane with radiation. And of course, that story where Wolverine, after taking out the X-Men, retires to live a peaceful life in Old Man Logan. Why are these stories so appealing? First of all, they tend to have a dark focus, dealing with characters who have suffered many losses over the years, which gives them a much more cynical and less heroic view of life. The same thing happens with the characters around them, since the passage of time takes its toll on both heroes and villains, who are presented in a completely different way. Because these stories allow us to see beyond the eternal present, where superhero stories usually take place. A future where things don't always end well. These are stories where the heroes grew up and realized that they could never completely stop evil in the world. In this last adventure, they reconnect with their original values, making them view their future more positively. Scott Snyder said in an interview that this comic borrows elements from The Dark Knight Returns. It adds an interesting twist. Although the story is set in the future of the Detective Comics universe, the Batman featured is a young clone of the original, resulting in a more idealistic and hopeful Batman, immersed in a world that seems utterly lost. So, the supporting cast does follow this old man story theme, but the main character still keeps the brightness of his youth. This comic also portrays Joker as Batman's ally and his sole connection to his remembered past. Do they mean Joker helps Batman? Not because he changed his mind, but because he always intended to make Bruce Wayne a better Batman, challenging him both physically and mentally. A recurring theme in Snyder's stories, which in his madness I guess makes sense, but anyway, here's a big spoiler for the story. In the end, this new Bruce Wayne discovers that Omega, the villain aiming to end free will, is actually the original Bruce Wayne, presumed dead years earlier. Now, having lost his faith in humanity, he shows no heroism. This again returns us to the typical old man stories, where heroes turn into villains or antagonists. Just like Dick Grayson in the Dark Knight universe, Hulk in the Old Man universe, and Logan Shazam in the Kingdom Come story. So, it's a very common trope that time ends up corrupting these characters. Here we see idealistic Bruce confront cynical Bruce, which I like because in a way it represents a struggle to see who is really Batman, the one with the original body or the one with the original ideals. This story kind of gives me Creepypasta vibes. Not just because it starts that way, but also because this story has Bruce Wayne turning evil, defeating Darkseid, and nearly conquering the world. It also seems like a story that taps into the appeal of alternate futures and the darker tone typical of creepypastas, right? Bruce Wayne was always in Arkham and Batman is just a traumatized child's delusion. Canonically, obviously not, but that's the magic of these kinds of stories because in their own way, The Last Night on Earth. It serves as both the conclusion to one of Batman's most acclaimed eras and a story highlighting what Batman should truly be. Something that goes beyond Bruce Wayne, and above all, it speaks to us about the things we regularly refuse to accept about the character. Because deep down, what makes this image so viral is that it strikes a chord in the minds of Batman fans. The idea that maybe he's closer to being like his villains than we often want to admit. What if this story started as an anonymous fanfic on the internet? But the fact that it's such a widely shared image and that eventually parts of this story ended up, by accident or not, in an official comic, they tell us that sometimes these stories made by fans manage to capture hidden truths about those characters we love so much, truths that have the potential to impact thousands of people. If you want to go with me to see the Superman movie, I'll leave the link for you to reserve your spot in the video description. I hope to see you there and be able to talk with you. That's all for now. Email me with questions. I'm Geo the Geek Monitor. Keep looking beyond the obvious.